There was a real sense of fear in the Clifton area of Bristol.
There have been numerous sex attacks over the past few months. Up until recently, there was intense police activity.
We're asking for the freedom to walk the streets after dark.
We were desperate to try and apprehend the person that was causing all this.
I would draw your attention to the latest photo fit.
They were very nasty attacks.
He probably would have continued attacking until he got caught.
There was quite a lot of pressure on the police force to catch him.
He could have murdered somebody.
We tried overt policing, we tried covert policing.
There was the need to do something rather special.
We were asked if he'd like to volunteer. They've got this operation going on, and it'll be doing some decoy work.
I was quite naive.
No protection whatsoever.
For all of them, they will have never have done anything like this before. It was groundbreaking, really was.
You hoped you'd be the one, that you'd catch him.
It's January 1979, and in Bristol, women are terrified. Candlelit vigils demonstrate the fear and anger women have towards the man who's been stalking the city's streets.
Like many women, I try not to walk out at night. I try and use a car where I can.
Of course, you're not too worried until it happens to you, but I wouldn't go out after dark on my own unless I knew there was going to be someone to take me home.
Over 18 months, 7 women have been assaulted by a phantom-like figure who's struck at will. But who is the rapist behind the e-fits? His last 2 attacks happened in the space of a week, and the police force is desperate.
We tried overt policing, we tried covert policing, and he was still being able to carry out the attacks.
He was going to attack again. He probably would have continued attacking until he got caught. He could have murdered somebody.
There was quite a lot of, obviously, pressure on the police force to catch him.
Police have tried everything, almost. One last high-risk option remains, a decoy operation. The force would ask its youngest, newest, least experienced female officers to walk these streets in an attempt to lure the Clifton rapist. The consequences, if it were to go wrong, were too terrible to bear.
Those that were in a senior management position at the time had realised that there was the need for us to do something rather special to try and draw this person out. It was a classic honey trap.
Nearly a dozen women would agree to take part in what would be codenamed Operation Argus. The operation was so secret that even some police departments would be unaware of its existence.
Using female officers as decoys was nothing new in policing, but using so many young, inexperienced officers in one operation was a calculated gamble. It was a risk for the force, and it was a risk for the women.
We were asked if he'd like to volunteer. They've got this operation going on, and it'll be working nights, doing some decoy work.
We all wanted to catch him, and I think we thought it was exciting.
I don't remember anybody saying no, they wouldn't do it because, you know, our job was to protect life and property as a policewoman. And we just thought, no, that's our job to do that. We want to catch them. We want to be, you know, part of it.
Policewomen were wanted to be seen as a target for this chap. If he was, you know, driving around looking for somebody, we wanted it to be us.
I was quite naive, but I was, you know, hardening up gradually. All my friends were doing it, all the other policewomen were doing it. And I think in those days as well, there was this sense of equality. And I didn't want people to think of me as a policewoman that, oh, she's too frightened to do something like that. You know, it's equal pay, but she's, you know, feels too vulnerable to do that.
I was young in service, 9 months in service, and just enjoying everything that was coming along. And it was another thing to do, another, you know, oh, yes, I'll volunteer.
Despite the enthusiasm of the decoy volunteers, senior officers were under no illusions. This would be a dangerous assignment.
This guy had used violence against women, so we knew that they were putting themselves forward to the likelihood of being attacked.
The attacker has threatened to kill his victims. Now, the force is using, as the top brass see it, its most vulnerable officers to try to catch its most violent criminal. the WPCs will need some training.
Even though I was only young at the time, I knew that it was something special that was happening.
Chris Gould was a young police constable on probation.
I did a lot of martial art in those days. I ended up being asked to do some self-defense training.
The victims had given police detailed descriptions of the way they'd been attacked.
It was effectively an attack from behind, like a rear-handed attack around the throat.
We were shown how to get somebody's hands from off round our necks. But, I mean, we weren't, you know, it wasn't like a 6-month course in training.
Detectives had analysed maps of where the attacks had happened. While none of the assaults had been on White Ladies Road, each of the victims had either walked or driven along it beforehand. The man had struck as they turned onto the darkened side streets.
The attacker had clearly been staking out the route himself, perhaps from the yellow Ford Capri that was seen in his final assault. And these were the routes the young police officers would walk, bait for the rapist.
The plan was to get out of the car, walk up the road, turn off into the dark area of Clifton to see if anything happened, basically.
To see if this attacker attacked you?
If it would happen. But the only stipulation they did say, if you could call it off at any time you wanted to if you felt unsafe, but if you did go through with it, he had to physically touch you to be arrested. I was dressed in jeans, a duffel coat and a scarf. I wanted to look like I was a student walking home from a late night, basically. I had a radio the size of a brick and a piece coming out of it, but being rendered Clifton as it was then, the radio mast wasn't very good, and quite often the radio would cut out anyway.
John le Carrier stuff, isn't it? The classic spy honey trap, isn't it? The technique has probably been around for a long time in various different forms.
But you've got to be very, very careful that you don't cross the line into entrapment. Very careful. That's always been the case, because that would just be thrown out as like, you've enticed this person to do this, and they weren't going to do it until you enticed them.
The operation started on a January night in 1979. Steph Bearden, Michelle Leonard and Sally DeFazio were just 3 of the 10 decoys.
Every night, 2 women at a shift would walk this route, but they weren't alone. They were surrounded by a small army of observation officers.
You suddenly think, they're my responsibility. I'm the one in charge of this unit that's now looking after these, and there's no way we're going to let them get hurt in any way, shape or form.
They were placed in people's gardens, and along the route you've always been watched.
I would have been probably in an overt position, and as soon as I heard they were coming anywhere near me, then I would put myself into a covert position.
I knew they were there. If they wanted to, they could reach out and actually touch me as I walked past if they wanted to. So I knew they were there. One did remark, he said, I could hear you breathing as you walked past. So that's how close they were.
Well, you could hear where they were at any particular time. And of course, as that person passed your particular spot, you would say that the subject's gone past where I am. And somebody had a little map probably and was working out where exactly they were at any particular time.
I do remember once it had started thinking, you know, it was quite scary in things, but other times it was completely routine and nothing happened. And I guess, you know, we were lulled into a false sense of security. I remember on one of the walks, the milk bottles rattling, being knocked over and thinking, oh, you know, is this it? And then a little head jumping up or appearing saying, sorry, it's us, as in it's the task force, and they'd step back into the milk bottles and knock them over.
Part of what you're doing is watching the female operative for her safety. But the second eye is effectively watching everything else, like the vehicles that are driving past, that may be slowing down, that somebody may be wolf whistling at at the individual, or looking out of a window, or shouting at them, or walking past them, or turning around and looking back at them.
If a man sort of walked towards them, you felt your heartbeat go up a bit because you thought, is this going to be it?
That feeling that something might happen really intensified.
It was quite easy to sort of merge in with those people because, you know, they were your ages, you were dressed like them. The only difference is that, you know, we had the microphones on us and we were being watched, whereas they weren't. So really, in a way, we were safer than they were.
There were always people about on White Ladies Road, but turned down the side roads, and lots of them were tree-lined, they were dark, yeah.
Shadows,
basement flats with, you know, places you could hide.
The use of the ground and the topography that you've got there, and the gardens and the shadows and the cars and all that stuff are all techniques that you've picked up, and you know how to disappear very quickly.
What kept most people awake, alert and active was the very fact that this was real and could happen and would happen on your shift. And I think, you know, you believed that it would, so you remained alert and active.
And we really thought that, you know, there was a chance that, you know, he would strike the night that we were doing it.
You hoped you'd be the one, you know, that you'd catch him.
It doesn't matter how you wrap this up and you think that there were all these police officers watching. The fact of the matter is that under attack, they're on their own. So you've got to be pretty brave to put yourself in that position.
Very vulnerable, very brave, and, you know, it must have been on the back of their minds all the time, because, you know, whilst every possible, you know, precaution can be put in place, there is always risk.
No stab vest, no protection whatsoever, in our own clothes, radios that, you know, you couldn't hear, you could barely understand what was being garbled.
I always thought that if he did come after me, I could run out of his reach.
The operation had been running for weeks. The decoys and their observation teams had been out most nights, but the Clifton rapists seemed to have just vanished. It was starting to feel like a fruitless exercise. The commanders had one last trick up their sleeves. It was, in equal measure, both audacious and desperate.
After a month or so, they decided to dress up a couple of policemen as women. Physically, they're going to be stronger, and if they did get somebody who was a bit, you know, tried it on or whatever, they could handle themselves. So they were trying something different, I think.
I was a slight build, small in terms of stature, so it was a sort of perfect fit.
Suddenly there's Chris Gould and Robbie Jones, and they said, can you bring some makeup in with you? We want you to make them up. So as the shift started, we would put their makeup on for them.
It would take me at least 2 hours to get dressed, at least 2 hours with the makeup. And I'm not exaggerating, it was a big thing to do. Over the 3 months, I was involved in 36 arrests. It was an extraordinary insight into being a female in our society. The constant fear of being on the street on your own.
And there was fear on the streets. The torchlit vigils continued, campaigners oblivious to the police's covert operation. But although Operation Argus had arrested many men for other offences, the Clifton rapists still evaded officers. Money and patience were running out.
It must have cost a fortune.
This obviously isn't going to work, so those in charge obviously were thinking it's time to pull it.
Police officers had been innovative, they'd been brave, they'd put their lives on the line, but they had failed in their prime objective. After months, the Clifton rapist was still elusive. He was still free to attack.
Next time.
So as he went past, I then recognised the identikit.
That heightens your senses.
Attention, this man is on life licence for murder, got previous convictions for rape.
The guy was walking behind her. He's quickening his step, he's getting closer, he's getting closer.